Hello, folks. Shintigercurl here. That dude in sand straw hat. Glad you could be here. You could be anywhere in the world right now, but I'm glad you chose to be here right with me. And today, living up to my promise that I was going to reread something. I was going to reread the horror classic Bram Stoker's Dracula for the month of October. And I've tried to get the lighting just right. I'm going to take a couple of minutes before I start reading. Got to finish dinner. Wait for everybody to fill in. Hope you guys like the layout. I tried to do the best I could with what I had, but this is just what we have. Sorry, I'm not used to face cam because I lacked a lot of USB ports on my computer. Most of it was tied up in with the capture card with my Elgato and my microphone right here. So I didn't have much opportunity to use a face cam right now. But since I'm not streaming any video games right now, so I don't really, it's freed up a spot, so face cam. Enjoy. All right. I'm just going to wait for everybody to filter in. I know there's a couple of people who have to get off from work and get themselves settled. So I'm going to wait for another 10 minutes. While we're doing that, I can finish off the rest of my fries. But, so if you're watching this on a recording, welcome. And if you're wondering, this is what I look like. This is if you've ever watched any of my Warmer Hordes videos, this is what I look like. Yep. Or if you've seen a lot of my, if you listened to my audio reading of Bram Stoker's Dracula that I did a few years back, it's pretty popular for some reason, even though I think it's pretty crap. This is what I look like. This is what I look like when I'm eating. Yep, just waiting. All I have to do, I'm just waiting for people to come in. At least I'm not gonna start until someone in the chat says something, so I know people are watching. Even if one person is watching, I don't mind, as long as somebody's enjoying it. I hope that's not thunder, because I don't want to shut down my stream too soon. All right. Just doing some double checking. All right. Gotta let everybody know that I'm live. All right. Live. All right. Gotta make sure everything is tip top. Gotta make sure I'm plenty hydrated because I'm gonna be talking for quite a while. All right. Still nobody's in yet. We're just gonna have to make do with what we got. I'm just gonna be talking just to talking. Gonna wait another 5 or 6 minutes. Make sure everything's copacetic. And check this stuff out. Okay. Alright, that's all shared up. I think my dad just called me, so I'm gonna be right back in a moment. Let you look at that for a while. right. Came back. That was nothing. Hello, Pugsley. Good to have you here. Great. Great to see everybody. See you here. That's more than enough. That's more than what I could have asked for. So, it's time for us to begin. Oh, hello, Griff. Welcome. Glad you could join us for this very spooky episode. Ooh. That's right. All right. Since we're here, I've got everything that I need. Lighting's appropriate. You guys apparently can hear me. Got my honey. Oh, October is awesome, mostly for me because 2 days after October is my birthday, so I got something to look forward to. Yay! All right. As for the background for this, as I was saying earlier, I did do a reading of Bram Stoker's Dracula for my channel, and despite the technical limitations of it, remains one of the happy early birthday to you. Despite the technical limitations of that early readings, those videos remain some of my most popular ones, reaching into the 4 digits, and I still get people commenting on them, despite how low quality they are. But I decided to redo this just to redo them. So I'm decided to do something for for October. Originally, I was gonna do a reading of Frank Herbert's Dune, but then YouTube shut me down for some reason. So hopefully they don't shut me down for this, because I really, really enjoy Bram Stoker's Dracula. It is a quintessential horror classic that should be read at least once during the Halloween season. So there's that. Just getting ready. All right. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Griff. So hopefully, Hopefully, YouTube won't shut my shit. Won't snake my recording of this when people watch it later on. But all right. Before we get started, I want to make it known that I am, of course, reading this offline. I don't have a physical copy, and even if I did, it would make reading this really, really hard. All right. I'm going to adjust it. I'm going to adjust the my OBS so I can be able to see the chat as well as read the thing. I'm going to put it in its own window. Okay. Just making sure. All right. Dracula. All right. There, that's good. All right. I already got the chapter queued up. I'm ready to go. All right. Little background of this. Bram Stoker's Dracula is a lot of the modern ideas that we have about vampires comes directly from this book. It really set up the modern image of what vampires are, what their powers are, and more importantly, who Count Dracula is. Now, the book itself is not told in the same narrative, same way as other books of its kind, because it's more like it'd be the literary equivalent of a found footage movie. It's just a bunch of journal entries, ship's logs, telegrams, shorthand notes, newspaper clippings, all telling the same story at different points in time. So at different points, the point of view will change from character to character. First, the major principal characters are, of course, Jonathan Harker. Thank you. Thank you. He said it so in the chat. You can see. The main players in the story, of course, Jonathan Harker, his fiancée and soon wife, Mina Harker, Lord Gold, at least I think that's how his name is pronounced. My pronunciation of a lot of these names are going to be off, so please forgive me. Dr. John Seward, Quincy Morris, a Texan, like myself, and of course, everybody's favorite Austrian-born man who tangles with Dracula and messes with the English language, none other than our boy, Dr. Abraham Van Helsing. So there's that. Let me take a swig of water. All right. Hopefully I'll try to do these accents as best as I can. It's been a long time since I've done them, so if if you think my accent is shitty, I'm sorry, but I'm just doing the best I can. Straight reading. Ah, yes, well, more like a not more like a cousin of the Belmonts, really. No, was he? I think he was a distant cousin. So I'm not sure. I do know that the Castlevania game series does incorporate the book as part of the canon. So a few characters in the Castlevania line. I can't remember his name. The protagonist from Castlevania Bloodlines, as well as one of the dual antagonists of Portrait of Ruin, were were both directly related to the Morris in this book. Yeah, John Morris. Yeah, I think yeah, John and Jonathan Morris. Yeah, John Morris is supposedly Quincy Morris's son. I think. I don't know, but I have to read watch Gamer Thumb's excellent chronology series of the entirety of the Castlevania storyline from start to finish. Some good stuff. Real good stuff. All right, that out of the way, we're 26 minutes in. Let's not waste any more time. And let's get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope the lights are off. I hope you've got a snack. I hope you got something to drink. And I hope you're ready. Because, welcome to Bram Stoker's Dracula. Chapter 1, Jonathan Harker's Journal. 3rd May, Brislitz. Left Munich at 8:35 p.m. on the 1st of May. Arrived at Vienna early next morning. Should have arrived at 6:46, but train was an hour late. Budapest seems a wonderful place, from the glimpse I got from it from the train and the little I could walk through the streets. I feared as to go very far from the station, as we arrived late and would start near as the correct time as possible. The impression I got that we were leaving the west and entering the east, the more western of splendid bridges over the Danube, which here were of noble width and depth, took us to the traditions of Turkish rule. We left in pretty good time, and came after nightfall to Klassensburg. Here I stopped for the night at the Hotel Royal. I had for dinner, or rather supper, a chicken done up some way with red pepper, which was very good but thirsty. Memo, get recipe for Mina. I asked the waiter, and he said it was called paprika hindal, and he said it was a national dish. I should be able to get it anywhere along the Carpathias. I found my smattering of German very useful here. Indeed, I don't know how I should be able to go on without it. Having had some time at my disposal in London, I had visited the British Museum and made search among the books and maps in the library regarding Transylvania. It had struck me with some foreknowledge of the country could have hardly failed to have some importance in dealing with a nobleman of that country. I find that the district he named in the extreme east of the country, just on the borders of the 3 states, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known portions of Europe. I was not able to light on any map or work giving the exact location of Castle Dracula, as there are no maps of this country yet to compare with my own ordnance survey maps. But I found Bristolitz, the port town named by Count Dracula, is a fairly well-known place. I shall enter here of some of my notes, as they may refresh my memory when I talk of my travels with Mina. In the population of Transylvania, there are 4 distinct nationalities. Saxons in the south, and mixed in with them the Wallachis, who were the descendants of the Dracanis, Magyars of the west, and Skelkelis. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. Skelkelis of the east and the north. I'm going to be among the latter, who claim to be descended from Attila and the Huns. This may be so, for when the Magyars conquered the country in the 11th century, they found the Huns had already settled in it. I read that most every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horseshoe of the Carpathias, as if it were the center of some kind of imaginative whirlpool. If so then my stay may be very interesting. Memo, I must ask the Count about them. I did not sleep well, though my bed was comfortable enough, for I had all sorts of queer dreams. There was a dog howling all night under my window, which may have something to do with it, or it may have been the paprika, for which I had to drink all the water in my caffrey, and I'm still thirsty. Towards morning I slept and was wakened by the continuous knock at my door, so I guessed I must have slept soundly since then. I had for breakfast more paprika and some porridge of maize flour, which they said was mamalinga, and eggplant stuffed with forcemeat, a very excellent dish, which they call impaltata. Impaltata. Get the recipe for this also. I had to hurry for breakfast. The train started a little before 8, and rather it ought to have done so, for after rushing to the station at 7:30, I had to sit in the carriage for more than an hour before we began to move. It seems that the further east you go, the more unpunctual are the trains. What ought they be in China? All day long, we seemed to dawdle through a country which was full of beauty of every kind. Sometimes we saw little towns or castles at the hilltops of steep hills, as such that we see in old missals. Sometimes we ran by rivers and streams which seemed from the far stormy margin on each side of them to be subject to great floods. It takes a lot of water and running strong to sweep the outside edge of the river clear. At every station there were groups of people, sometimes crowds, and in all sorts of attire. Some of them were like the peasants at home, or those I saw coming through France or in Germany, with short jackets and round hats and homemade trousers, but others were very picturesque. The women looked very pretty, except when you go near them, but they were very clumsy about the waist. They had all full white sleeves of some kind or another, and most of them had big belts with lots of strips of something fluttering in like in the dresses of a belt. But of course, there were petticoats under them. The strangest figures we saw was the Slovaks, who were more barbarian than the rest, with their big cowboy hats, great baggy, dirty white trousers, white linen shirts, and enormous heavy leather boots, nearly a foot wide, all strutted over with brass nails. They wore high boots with their trousers tucked in them, and they had long black hair and heavy black moustaches. They were very picturesque, but they don't look prepossessing. On the stage, they would be set down at once, as if some old Oriental band of brigands. They are, however, I am told, very harmless and were rather wanting in natural self-assertion. It was on the dark side of the twilight that we got to Bristolets, which is a very old and interesting place, being particularly on the frontier, for the Borgo Pass leads from it to Bukovina. It had some very stormy existence, and it certainly showed the mark of it. 50 years ago, a series of great fires took place there, which made a terrible havoc on 5 separate occasions. At the beginning of the 17th century, it underwent a siege of 3 weeks and lost 13,000 people, the casualties of war being assisted by famine and disease. Count Dracula had directed me to go to the Golden Krone Hotel, which I found, to my great delight, to be thoroughly old-fashioned, for of course I wanted to see all I could in the ways of the country. I was evidently expected, for when I got near the door, I faced a cheery-looking elderly woman in the usual peasant dress, white undergarments with a long double apron, front and back, of colored stuff fitting almost too tightly for modesty. When I came close, she bowed to me and said, "Herr's English gentleman?" "Yes," I said. "Jonathan Harker." She smiled and gave some message to an elderly man in white sleeve shirts who had followed her to the door. He went in, but immediately returned with a letter. "My friend, welcome to the Carpathians. I am anxiously expecting you. Sleep well tonight. At 3 tomorrow the diligences will start for Bukovina. A place on it is kept for you. At the Borgo Pass, my carriage will await you and bring you to me. I trust that your journey from London will be a happy one, and that you will enjoy your stay in my beautiful land. Your friend, Dracula." 4th May. I found that my landlord had got a letter from the Count directing him to secure the best place on the coach for me, but on making inquiries as to the details, he seemed somewhat reluctant and pretended he could not understand my German. This could not be true. Thank you for the note, Grim. Thank you for the notice, Griff. This could not be true, because up until then he had understood it perfectly. At least he answered my questions as if he did. He and his wife, the old lady who received me, looked at each other in a frightened sort of way. He mumbled about the money that had been sent with the letter, and it was all he knew. When I asked if he knew Count Dracula and could tell me anything about his castle, both he and his wife crossed themselves, and saying they knew nothing at all, simply refused to speak any further. It was so near the time of starting that I had no time to ask anyone else, for it was all very mysterious, and not all means comforting. Just before I was leaving, the old lady came to my room and said in a hysterical way, "Must you go? Oh, young Herr, must you go?" She was in such an excited state that she seemed to have lost her grip on what German she knew, and mixed it up with some other language that I did not know at all. I was just about to follow her up with some questions. I was able to follow her by asking many questions. When I told her that I must go at once, and that I was engaged in important business, she asked again, "Do you know what today it is?" I answered it was the 4th of May. She shook her head and said again, "Yes, I know that, but do you know what day it is?" On my saying I did not understand, she went on, "It is the eve of St. George's Day. Do you not know that tonight, when the clock strikes midnight, all the evil things in the world have full sway? Do you know where you are going and what you are going to do?" She was in such evidently distressed that I tried to comfort her, but without any effect. Finally, she went down on her knees and implored me not to go. At least, wait a day before I began starting. It was all very ridiculous, but I did not feel comfortable at all. However, there was business to be done, and I could not allow it to interfere. I tried to raise her up and said as gravely as I could that I thanked her, but my duty was imperative, that I must go. She then rose and dried her eyes, and taking her crucifix from her neck and offered it to me. I did not know what to do, for as an English churchman I had been taught to regard such things as measurably idolatrous, and yet it seemed so ungracious to refuse an old lady meaning so well, and in such a state of mind. She saw, I suppose, the doubt in my face, for she put the rosary around my neck and said, "For your mother's sake," and then went out of the room. I am writing this part of the diary whilst I wait for the coach, which is, of course, late, and the crucifix is still around my neck. Whether it's the old woman's fear, or the many ghostly traditions of this place, or the crucifix itself, I do not know, but I am not feeling nearly as easy as my mind as usual. If this book should ever reach Mina before I do, let it bring her my goodbye. Here comes the coach. 5th May. The castle. The gray of the morning had passed, and the sun is high over the distant horizon, which seems jagged, whether with trees or hills I know not what, for it is so far that the big things and little things are mixed. I am not sleepy, and as I am not to be called till I wake, naturally I write till sleep comes. There are many odd things to put down, and lest to reach this fancy that I dined too well before I left Bristol, let me put down my dinner exactly. I dined on what they called robber steak, bits of bacon, onion, and beef seasoned with red pepper and strung up on sticks, and then roasted over the fire, in the simple style of the London cat's meat. The wine was golden Melodici, which produces a queer sting on the tongue, which is, however, not disagreeable. I had only a couple of glasses of this, and nothing else. When I got to the coach, the driver had not taken a seat, and I saw him talking to the landlady. They were evidently talking of me, for every now and then they would look up at me, and some of the people who were sitting at the bench outside the door came and listened, and they all looked at me, most of them pityingly. I could hear a lot of words often be repeated, queer words, for there were many nationalities in the crowd. So I quietly got my polyglot dictionary from my bag and looked them up. I must say that they were not cheering to me, for among them were Urdog, Satan, Pokrold, Hell, Shintigercurl, Witch, Volorok, and Vistark both mean the same thing, one being Slavic and the other Servian, for something that is either werewolf or vampire. I must ask the Count about these superstitions. When we started, the crowd around the inn door, which by this time had swelled to a considerable size, all made the sign of the cross and pointed 2 fingers towards me. With some difficulty, I got a fellow passenger to tell me what they meant. He would not answer at first, but on learning that I was English, he explained that it was a charm or a guard against the evil eye. This was not very pleasant for me, just starting for an unknown place to meet an unknown man, but everyone seemed so kind-hearted and so sorrowful and so sympathetic that I could not help but be touched. I shall never forget the last glimpse I had of the inn and its crowd of picturesque figures, all crossing themselves as they stood round the wide archway, with its background of rich foliage of oleander and orange trees, in the green tubes clustered in the center of the yard. Then our driver, whose wide linen drawers covered the wide front of the box seat, Grossi they called them, cracked his whip over the 4 small horses which ran abreast, and we set off on our journey. I soon lost sight and any recollection of ghostly fears in the beauty of the scenery in which we drove along. Although I know the language, or rather languages, for which my fellow passengers were speaking, I might not have been able to throw them off so easily. Before us lay a green sloping land full of trees and woods, with here and there steep hills crowned with lumps of trees or with farmhouses. The blank gable the blank gable at the end of the road. There was everywhere a bewildering mass of fruit blossoms, apples, plums, pears, cherries, and as we drove by I could see green grass under the trees spangled with fallen petals. In and out amongst these green hills is what they call the Mittal land, ran the road, losing itself as it swept up the grassy curve, or was shut out by the strangling ends of pine woods, which here and there ran down the hillsides like tongues of flame. The road was rugged, but we seemed to fly over it with feverish haste. I could not understand what the haste meant, but the driver was evidently bent on losing no time in reaching the Borgo Pass. I was told that the road in the summertime excellent, but it had not yet been put under the orders after the winter snows. In this respect, it is different from the general roads of the Carpathias, for it is an old tradition that they are not to be kept too in good order. Of the old hospodars would not repair them, lest the Turks think that they were preparing to bring in a foreign troops, and to hasten the war which is always ready at loading point. Beyond the green swelling hills of the Mittal land rose mighty sweeps of forest up to the lofty steps of the Carpathias themselves. Right and left of us they towered, with the afternoon sun falling between them and bringing out the righteous and glorious colors of this beautiful range, deep blue and purple in the shadows of the peaks, green and brown where the grass and rocks mingled, and an endless perspective of jagged rocks and pointed crags, till these were themselves lost in the distance, where the snowy peaks rose grandly. Here and there seemed mighty rifts of the mountain, through which, as the sun began to sink low, we saw now and again the white gleam of falling water. One of my companions touched my arm as we swept up the base of the hill and opened up the lofty snow-covered peaks of the mountain, which seemed, as we rounded our serpentine way, to be right before us. "Look! It's the insecti! God's seat!" And he crossed himself reverently. As we wound on our endless way, and the sun sunk lower and lower behind us, the shadows of the evening began to creep around us. This was emphasized by the fact that the snowy mountain tops still held the sunset and seemed to glow with a delicate, cool pink. Here and there we passed Czechs and Slovaks, all in picturesque attire, but I noticed the Gotri were painfully prevalent. By the roadside were many crosses, and as we swept by, many of my companions crossed themselves. Here and there was a peasant man or woman kneeling before a shrine, who did not even turn round as we approached, but seemed in the self-surrender of devotion to have neither eyes nor ears for the outer world. There were many things new to me. For instance, hay ricks in the trees, and here and there beautiful masses of weeping birch, their white stems shining like silver and the delicate green of the leaves. Now and again we passed a litter wagon, the ordinary peasant's cart, and its long snake-like vertebra, calculated to suit the inequalities of the road. On this were to be sure to be seated quite a group of homecoming peasants, the Czechs in their white and the Slovaks in their colored sheepskins, the later carrying lance fashion, their long staves with an axe at the end. At the evening it fell, it began to become very, very cold, and the growing twilight seemed to merge into one dark mistiness, the gloom of the trees, oak, beech, and pine. Though the valleys ran deep between the spurs of the hills as we ascended up the pass, the stark firs stood out here and there against the background of late lying snow. Sometimes, as the road was cut through the pine woods, it seemed that the darkness seemed to be closing in on us. Great masses of grayness here and there between the trees, producing a particularly weird and solemn effect, which carried on the thoughts and grim fancies engendered early in the evening, where the falling sunset threw the strange relief of the ghost-like clouds, which among the Carpathias would seem to be the wind ceaselessly through the valley. Sometimes the hills were so steep that despite our driver's haste, the horses could only go slowly. I wished to get down and walk with them, as we do at home, but the driver would not hear of it. "No, no," he said. "You must not walk here. The dogs are too fierce." And then he added with what evidently meant to be grim pleasantry, for he looked round to catch the approving smile of the rest. "And you may have enough of such manners before you go to sleep." The only stop we would make for a moment's pause, would be to momentarily pause to light his lamps. When it grew dark, there seemed to be some excitement among the passengers, and they kept speaking to him, one after another, as though urging him to further speed. He lashed the horses unmercifully with his long whip, and with wild cries of encouragement urged them to further exhortations. Then through the darkness I could see some sort of patch of gray light ahead of us, and as though a cleft in the hills. The excitement of the passengers grew greater. The crazy coach rocked on its great leather spurs and swayed like a boat tossed in a stormy sea. I had to hold on. The road grew more level, and we appeared to be flying along. Sorry about that. Where was I? Then the mountains seemed to come nearer to us on each side and frown down upon us. We were entering the Borgo Pass. One by one, several of the passengers offered us gifts, which they were pressed upon me with. No, that was my mom throwing me some candy. That's all. One by one, several of the passengers offered me gifts, which they were pressed upon me with an earliness that taken no denial. They were certainly an odd and varied kind, but each were given with simply in good faith, with a kindly word and a blessing, and that same strange mix of fear meeting movements which I had seen outside the hotel in Bristolets, the sign of the cross and the guard against the evil eye. Then as we flew along, the driver leaned forward, and on each side of the passengers, craned over the edge of the coach, peered eagerly into the darkness. It was evident that something very exciting was either happening or expected. And though I asked each passenger no one would give me the slightest explanation. This state of excitement kept on for some time, and at last we saw before us the pass open up to the eastern side. There were dark, rolling clouds overhead, and in the air the heavy, oppressive sense of thunder. It seemed as though the mountain range had separated into two atmospheres, and now that we had gotten into the thunderous one. I was now myself looking out for the conveyance in which to take me to the Count. Each moment I expected to see the glare of lamps through the blackness, but all was dark. The only light that flickered was the rays of our own lamps, in which the stream from our hard driving horses rolled up into white clouds. We could see now the sandy road lying white before us, but there on it stood no sign of a vehicle. The passengers drew back with signs of gladness. which seemed to mock my own disappointment. I was already thinking what I had best to do when the driver, looking at his watch, said to the others something which I could hardly hear. It was spoken so quietly and in such a low tone I thought it was an hour less than the time. And then turning to me, he spoke in German worse than my own. There are no carriages here. The Herr is not expected at all. He will now come on the Bukovina and return tomorrow, the next day. Better the next day. Whilst he was speaking, the horses began to neigh and snort and plunge wildly, as the driver had to hold them up. Then, amidst a chorus of screams from the peasants and a universal crossing of the cells, a calash with 4 horses drove up beside us, overtook us, and drew beside the coach. I could see from the flash of our lamps as the rays fell on them that the horses were coal black and splendid animals. They were driven by a tall man with a long brown beard and a thick great black hat, which seemed to hide his face from us. I could see the gleam of a pair of very bright eyes, which seemed red in the lamplight as he turned to us. He said to the driver, "You are early, my friend." The man stammered in a reply, The English Herr was in a hurry," to which the stranger replied, "That is why, I suppose, you wished for him to go on to Bukovina. You cannot deceive me, my friend. I know too much, and my horses are swift." As he spoke, and he smiled, and the lamplight fell on his hard-looking mouth, with very red lips and sharp-looking teeth, white as ivory. One of my camp companions whispered to another in Burgers Lenore. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but translation is, "For the dead travel fast." The strange driver evidently heard the words, for he looked up with a gleaming smile. The passenger turned her face away, at the same time putting her 2 fingers and crossing herself. "Give me the Herr's luggage," said the driver, and with exceeding clarity my bags were handed out and put on the caleche. Then I descended from the side of the coach, as the caleche drew close on alongside, the driver helping me with a hand which caught my arm in a grip of steel. His strength must have been prodigious. Without a word, he shook his reins, the horses turned, and we swept into the darkness of the pass. As I looked back, I saw the stem of the horses of the coach by the light of the lamps, and projected against it the figures of my late companions crossing themselves. Then the driver cracked his whip and called to his horses, and off they sped on their way to Bukovina. As they sank into the darkness, I felt a strange chill and a lonely feeling come over me. But a cloak was thrown over my shoulders, and a rug across my legs and knees, and the driver said in excellent German, "The night is chill, mein Herr, and my master the Count bade me take care of you. There is a flask of Skidvesti, the plum brandy of the country, underneath the seat, should you require it." I did not take any, but it was a comfort to know it was there all the same. I felt a little strangely, but not a little frightened. I think there had been an alternative should I have taken it, instead of prosecuting that unknown night journey. The carriage went at a hard pace straight along, and then we made a complete turn and went along the straight road. It seemed to me that we were simply going over and over the same ground, so I took note of some salient point and found that this was so. I would have liked to have asked the driver what it all meant, but I feared to do so, for I thought, placed as I was, that any protest would have no effect in the case that there had been any intention of a delay. By and by, however, I was curious to know how time was passing. I struck a match, and by its flame I looked at my watch. It was a few minutes within midnight. This gave me a sort of shock, for I suppose the general superstition about midnight was increased by my recent experiences. I waited with a sick feeling of suspension. Then a dog began to howl somewhere in a farmhouse down the road, a long agonizing wailing as if from fear. The sound was taken up by another dog, and then another, till, borne on the wind from which signaled softly through the past, a wild howling began, which seemed to come from all over the country, as if the imagination could grasp it through the gloom of the night. At the first howl, the horses began to strain and rear, but the driver spoke to them soothingly, and they quieted down, but shivered and sweated as they were running from as though a runaway from sudden fright. Then, far off in the distance, from the mountains of each side of us began a louder, sharper howl, that of wolves, that affected both the horses and myself in the same way. For I was minded to jump from the caleche and run, whilst they reared up again and plunged madly, so that the driver had to use all of his great strength to keep them from bolting. In a few minutes, however, my own ears got accustomed to the sound, and the horses so far became quiet that the driver was able to descend and stand before them. He patted and soothed them, whispering something in their ears, as I've heard of horse tamers doing, and with extraordinary effect, for under his caresses they became quite manageable, again, though they still trembled. The driver then took his seat, and shaking his rein, started off at a great pace. This time, after going to the far side of the pass, they suddenly turned down a narrow roadway which ran straight to the right. Soon we were hemmed in by trees, which in places arched right over the roadway until we passed through as of a tunnel. Then again great frowning rocks guided us boldly on either side. Though we were in shelter, we could hear the rising wind, for it moaned and whistled through the rocks, and the breaches of trees clashed together as we swept along. It grew colder and colder still, and fine white powdery snow began to fall, so that soon we and all who were around us were covered in a white blanket. The keen wind still carried the howling of the dogs, though this grew fainter as we went on our way. The baying of the wolves sounded nearer and nearer, as though they were closing in around us on every side. I grew dreadfully afraid, and the horses shared my fear. The driver, however, was not in the least disturbed. He turned his head to the right and left, but I could not see anything through the darkness. Suddenly, away on our left, I saw a faint flicker of blue flame. The driver saw it at the same moment. He had once again checked the horses, and jumping to the ground, disappeared into the darkness. I didn't know what to do. The less of the howling of the wolves grew closer, but while I wondered, the driver suddenly appeared again, and without a word took his seat, and we resumed our journey. I think I must have fallen asleep and kept dreaming of the incident, for it seemed to be repeated endlessly, and now looking back on it, it seemed like some awful nightmare. Once the flame appeared so near the road that even in the darkness around us I could watch the driver's motions. He went rapidly to where the blue flame arose, though it must have been faint, for it was not seem to illuminate the place or at all around it, and gathering a few stones, formed some sort of device. Once there appeared to be a strange optical effect. When he stood between me and the flame, he did not obstruct it, for I could see his ghostly flicker at the same. This startled me, but as the effect was only momentary, I took it as my eyes deceiving me, straining in the darkness. For a time there was no blue flames, and we sped onwards through the gloom, with the howling of wolves behind us, as though they were following us in a moving circle. At last we came to a time when the driver went further afield than he had ever gone yet, and during his absence the horses began to tremble worse than ever, and to snort and scream with fright. I could not see any cause for it, for the howling of the wolves had ceased altogether. But just then the moon, sailing through the black clouds, appeared behind the jagged crest of the beetling, pine-cracked forest, and by its light I saw around us a ring of wolves, with white teeth and lolling red tongues, with long, sinewy limbs and shaggy hair. They were 100 times more terrible than the grim silence for which held them than they ever did when they howled. For myself, I felt a sort of paralysis of fear. It was only when a man feels himself face to face with such horrors that he can truly understand their true import. All at once the wolves began to howl, as though the moonlight had some peculiar effect on them. The horses jumped about and reared, looked helplessly round with eyes that rolled in a painful way to see. But then the living ring of terror encompassed them on every side, and they had perforce to remain within it. I called to the coachman to come, for it seemed to me that our only chance was to try to break through the ring and to aid his approach. I shouted and beat the side of the calash, hoping that the noise would scare the wolves from the side, as to give him a chance to reach the ring, reaching through the trap. How he came there I know not, but I heard his voice raised in a tone of imperious command, and looking towards the sound, saw him standing in the roadway. As he swept his long arms, as though brushing aside some impassable obstacle, the wolves fell back, and back further still. Just then a heavy cloud passed across the face of the moon, so we were in darkness again. When I could see again, the driver was climbing onto the caleche and the wolves had disappeared. This was all so strange and uncanny that a dreadful fear came upon me, and I was afraid to speak or move. The time seemed interminable as we swept our way, now in the utmost, almost complete darkness, as the rolling clouds obscured the moon. We kept ascending, for occasional periods of quick descent, but in the main always ascending. Suddenly I became conscious of the fact that the driver was in the act of pulling the horses up into the courtyard of a vast ruined castle, from which tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line against the sky. And that's chapter 1 for you guys. Woo! It's been a while since I hit that hard. All right, what do you guys think so far? Spooky? Scary? All that other stuff? I see you sent me something, Pugsley. Let me go look that up really quick. What is this? Oh, that's... The irony of that is amazing. I can't believe you were listening to Dracula while you were listening to me. That's pretty awesome. All right, let me... thank you, Griff. Let me get a quick chug of water. And a little bit of honey. Honey hits the spot. Thank you. All right, let's move on to chapter 2. Hold on for a second. I gotta go take care of something. Be right back. All right, I'm back. Just to take care of something. All right, chapter 2. Jonathan Harker's journal continued. 5th May. I must have been asleep, for certainly if I had been fully awake, I would have noticed the approach of such a remarkable place. In the gloom of the courtyard looked of considerable size, and as several dark ways led from it under great round arches, it seemed perhaps bigger than it really was. I had not been able to see it by daylight. When the caleche stopped, the driver jumped down and held out his hand to assist me to alight. Again, I could not help but notice his prodigious strength. His hand actually seemed like a steel vice that he could have crushed mine if he had chosen. Then he took my traps and placed them on the ground beside me as I stood closer to the great door, old and studded with large iron nails, and seemed to be projecting doorway of massive stone. I could even see in the dim light that the stone was massively carved, but the carving had been worn by time and weather. As I stood, the driver jumped into his seat and took the reins. The horses started forward, and trap and all disappeared down one of the dark openings. I stood in silence where I was, for I did not know what to do. Of bell or knocker there was no sign. Through these frowning walls and dark window openings, it's not likely that my voice could penetrate. The time I waited seemed endless, and I felt doubts and fears crowding up among me. What sort of place had I come to, and among what kind of people? What sort of grim adventure was it that I had embarked on? Was this a customary incident of the life of a solicitor's clerk set out to explain the purchase of a London estate to a foreigner? Solicitor's clerk. Mina would not like that. Solicitor, for just before leaving London, I got word that my examination was successful, and now I'm a full-blown solicitor. I began to rub my eyes and pinch myself to see if I were awake. It all seemed like a horrible nightmare to me, and I expected I should awake, finding myself at home, with the dawn struggling in through the windows, as I had now and again felt the morning after a day of overwork. But my flesh answered the pinching test, and my eyes could not be deceived. I was indeed awake and among the Carpathians. All I could do now was wait and be patient for the coming morning. Just as I was about to come to the conclusion that I had heard a heavy step approach from behind the great door, and saw through the chinks of the gleam of a coming light. Then there, with the sound of rattling chains and clanking of massive bolts drawn back, a key was turned with a loud grating noise of long disuse, and the great door swung back. Within stood a tall man, clean-shaven save for a long white mustache, and clad in black from head to toe, without a single speck of color about him anywhere. He held in his hand an antique silver lamp, which in it the flame burned without chimney or globe of any kind, throwing long quivering shadows as it flicked out in the draught of the open door. The old man motioned me to come in with his right hand with a courtly gesture, saying in excellent English but with a strange intonation, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely, and of your own free will." He made no motion of stepping to meet me, but stood like a statue, as if his gesture of welcome had fixed him to stone. The instant, however, that I stepped over the threshold, he moved impulsively towards me, and holding out his hand, gripped mine with a strength which made me wince, an effort which did not lessen by the fact that it seemed as cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead man than a living one. Again he said, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring." The strength of the handshake was so much akin to that which I had noticed from the driver, whose face I had seen, that for a moment I doubted if they were not the same person with whom I was speaking to. So to make sure, I said interrogatively, "Count Dracula?" He bowed in a courtly way and replied, "I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome, Mr. Harker, to my house. Come in, the night air is chill, and you must need to eat or sleep." As he was speaking, he held the lamp on a bracket on the wall, and stepping out, took my luggage. He carried it in before I could forestall him. I protested, but he insisted. "Nay, sir, you are my guest. It is late and my people are not available. Let me see to your comfort myself." He insisted on carrying my traps along the passage, and then up the great winding stair, and along another great passage. On those stone floors our steps rang heavily. At the end of this he threw open a heavy door, and I rejoiced to see within a well-lit room in which a table was spread for supper, and for whose mighty hearth a great fire of logs, freshly replenished, flamed and flared. The Count halted, putting my bags down, closed the door, and crossed the room, opening another door, which led to a small octagonal room lit by a single lamp, and seemingly without a window of any sort. Passing through this, he opened another door, and motioned for me to enter. It was a welcome sight, for here was a great bedroom, well lighted and warmed with another log fire, also added to but lately, for the top of the logs were fresh, which set a howling roar up the wide chimney. The Count himself left my luggage inside and withdrew, saying before he closed the door, "You will need, after your journey, to refresh yourself by making your toilet. I trust you will find all you wish. When you are ready, come into the other room, where you will find your supper prepared." The light and warmth of the Count's courteous welcome seemed to have dissipated all my doubts and fears. Having then reached my normal state, I discovered that I was half famished from hunger, so making a hasty toilet, I went into the other room. I found supper already laid out, My host, who stood at one side of the great fireplace, leaning against the stonework, made a graceful wave of his hand at the table and said, "I pray you, be seated and sup as you please. You will, I trust, excuse me, but I do not join you, for I have dined already, and I do not wish to sup." I handed to him the seal in which Mr. Hawkins had entrusted me. He opened it and read it gravely. Then with a charming smile, he handed me to read. One passage of it at least gave me a thrill of pleasure. "I must regret that an attack of gout, which is already a malady I considerably suffer from, forbids me any travel for my part for some time to come. But I am happy to say that I will send a sufficient substitute, one in which I have every possible confidence. He is a young man, full of energy, and a talent all of his own, and of a very faithful disposition. He is discreet and silent, and has grown into manhood in my service. He shall be ready to attend you when you are willing during his stay, and take your instructions in all manners." The Count came forward and took the cover of a dish, and I fell at once on an excellent roast chicken. This, with some cheese and a salad and a bottle of eau Tokai. Of course, I had 2 glasses with my supper. During the time I was eating, the Count asked me many questions as to my journey, and I told him by digress all I had experienced. By the time I finished my supper, and by my host's desire, had drawn up a chair by the fire and began to smoke a cigar which he offered, at the same time excusing that he did not smoke. I had now an opportunity of observing him, and found him to be of a very marked physiognomy. His face was strong, very strong, aquiline, with a high bridge of a thin nose and peculiarly arched nostrils, with a loftily domed forehead, and hair growing scantily around the temples but profusely everywhere. His eyebrows were very massive, almost meeting over the nose, and with brushy hair that seemed to curl up in profusion. The mouth, so far as I could see it under his heavy mustache, was fixed and rather cruel-looking, with peculiarly sharp white teeth. These protruded over the lips, which were remarkably ruddiness, showed astonishing vitality for a man of his years. For the rest, his ears were pale, and the tops were extremely pointed. The chin was broad and strong, and the cheeks firm though thin. The general effect was of extraordinary pallor. Hitherto I noticed the backs of his hands as they lay on his knees in the firelight, and they seemed rather white and fine. But seeing them now close to me, I could not help but notice that they were rather coarse, broad, with squat fingers. Strange to say, there were hairs at the center of his palm. His nails were long and fine, and cut to sharp points. As the Count leaned over to me and his hand touched mine, I could not help but repress a shudder. It may have been that his breath was rank, but a horrible feeling of nausea came over me, which, do what I would, I could not conceal. The Count, noticing, drew back, and with a grim sort of smile which showed me more that he had yet done his proponent teeth, sat himself down on his side of the fireplace. We were both silent for a while, and as I looked towards the window, I saw the first dim streaks of the coming dawn. There seemed a strange stillness over everything, but as I listened, I heard as if from down below in the valley the howling of many wolves. The Count's eyes gleamed, and he said, "Listen to them, children of the night. What music they make." Seeing, I suppose, some expression on my face strange to him, he added, "Ah, sir, your dwellings in the city cannot enter into the feelings of the hunter." He then rose and said, "But you must be tired. Your bedroom is all ready, and tomorrow you shall sleep as late as you will. I will have to be away until the afternoon, so sleep well and dream well." With a courteous bow, he opened the door himself into the long octagonal room, and I entered my bedroom. I am at all in a sea of wonders, I doubt, I fear. I think strange things which I do not confess to my own soul. God keep me, if only for the sake of those dear to me. May 7th. It is again early morning, but I have rested and enjoyed the last 24 hours. I slept late into the day and awoke of my own accord. When I had dressed myself, I went into the room where we had supped, and found a cold breakfast laying out, with coffee kept hot by the pot placed on the hearth. There was a card on the table, which was written, I have been absent for a while. Do not wait for me. D. I sat and enjoyed a hearty meal. When I was done, I looked for a bell so that I might let the servants know I had finished, but I could not find one. There were certainly odd deficiencies in the house, considering the extraordinary evidence of wealth which was around me. The table service is of gold and so beautifully wrought that it must have been of immense value. The curtains and upholstery of the chairs and sofas and the hangings of my bed were of the costliest and most beautiful fabrics, and must have been of fabulous value when they were made, for they were centuries old, though in excellent order. I saw something like them in Hampton Court, but they were worn and frayed and moth-eaten. But still, in none of these rooms was there a mirror. There was not even a toilet glass on my table, and I had to get the little shaving glass from my bag before I could either shave or brush my hair. I had not seen a servant anywhere, or heard the sound near the castle, except for the howling of wolves. Some time after I finished the meal, I do not know whether to call it breakfast or dinner, for it was between 5 and 6 o'clock when I had it. I looked around for something to read, for I did not like to go about the castle until I asked the Count's permission. There was absolutely nothing in the room, book, newspaper, or even written materials, so I opened another door in the room and found a sort of library. The door opposite to mine I tried, but found it locked. In the library, I, to my great delight, found a vast number of English books, whole shelves full of them, and bound volumes of magazines and newspapers. A table in the center was littered with English magazines and newspapers, though none of them were very recent date. The books were the most varied kind: history, geography, politics, political economy, botany, geography, law, all relating to England and English life and customs and manner. There are even such books of reference as the London Dictionary, the Red and Blue Books, Whitaker's Almanac, the Army and Navy List, and somehow it gladdened my heart to see it, the Law List. Whilst I was looking at the books, the door opened and the Count entered. He saluted me in a haughty way, and hoped that I had a good night's rest. Then he went on, "I am glad that you found your way in here, for I am sure there is much that will interest you. These companions," and he laid his hand on some of the books, "have been good friends to me, and some years past, even ever since I had the idea of going to London, have given me many, many hours of pleasure. Through them I've come to know your great England, and to know her is to love her. I long to go through the crowded streets of your mighty London, to be in the midst of the whirl and rush of humanity, to share its life, its change, its death, and all to make it what it is. But alas, as yet I know your tongue to books. To you, my friend, I look to know how to speak." "But, Count," I said, you know and speak English thoroughly." He bowed gravely. "I thank you, my friend, for your all too flattering estimate, but yet I fear I am but a little on the way of the road I travel. True, I know the grammar and the words, but I yet know not how to speak them." "Indeed," I said, "you speak excellently." "Not so," he answered. "Well, I know that, did I not move and speak to you in London, none of them who would know me to be a stranger. That is not enough for me. Here I am noble, I am a boyar. The common people know me, and I am master, but a stranger in a strange land, he is no one. Men know him not, and to know not is to care for naught. I am content if I am like the rest, so that no man stops if he sees me, or pauses in his speaking when he hears my words." Stranger, a stranger. I have been so long a master that I have come that would be master still, lest others should be master of me. You have come to me not alone as an agent of my friend Peter Hawkins of Exeter, to tell me about my new estate in London. You shall, I trust, rest with me for a while, so that by our talking I may learn the English notation, and that you would tell me when I make an error, even the smallest in my speaking. I am sorry that I had to be away for so long today, but you will know I will not forgive one who has had so many important affairs in hand. Of course, I said, all I could be willing to. and asked if I could come into the room in which I choose. He answered, "Yes, certainly," and added, "You may go anywhere you wish in the castle, except for the doors that are locked, which of course you will not wish to go. There is a reason for all the things that they are, and did you see with my eyes and know that with my knowledge, you would perhaps better understand." I said I was sure of this, and he went on, are in Transylvania, and Transylvania is not England. Our ways are not your ways, and there should be to you many strange things. Nay, what you have told me of me and your experiences already, you know something of what strange things there may be. This led to a much conversation, and as evident as he wanted to talk only for talking's sake, I asked him many questions regarding things that had already happened to me or come to my notice. Sometimes he sneered off the subject or turned the conversation by pretending not to understand, but genuinely he answered all that I asked most frankly. As time went on and I got somewhat bolder, I asked him of the strange things of my preceding night, as for instance why the coachman went to the places where he had seen blue flames. He then explained to me that it was commonly believed that on certain nights of the year, last night in fact, when all the evil spirits were supposed to have unchecked sway, a blue flame is seen over any place where treasure might be concealed. "That treasure has been hidden," he went on, "in the region through which you came through last night. There can be little doubt. For it was the ground fought over for centuries when there were Lartians, the Saxons, and the Turks. Why, there was hardly a foot of soil in all this region that has not been enriched with the blood of men, patriots or invaders. In the old days there were stirring times when the Austrians and the Hungarians came up in hordes, and the patriots went out to meet them, men and women, the aged and the children too, and waited their coming on the rocks above the passes so that they might sweep destruction upon them with their artificial avalanches. When the invader was triumphant, he found but little, for when there had been shelter in friendly soil." "But how," said I, "how can I have remained so long undiscovered, when there is surely an index of it, if men but willing to take the trouble to look?" The Count smiled, and his lips ran back over his gums. The long, sharp canines showed out strangely. He answered, Because your peasant is at heart a coward and a fool. Those flames only appear at one night, and on that night no man in this land will, if he can help it, stir without his heart at the door. And did, sir. Even if he did, he would not know what to do. Why, even the peasant you tell me who marked the place of the flames would not be able to look in the daylight of his own work. Ever you would not, I dare be sworn, be able to find these places again? There you are right, I said. I know no more of the dead when even to look for them. And then he drifted on to other matters. "Ah, come," he said at last. "Tell me of London, of the house in which you have procured for me." With an apology for my remissness, I went into my own room to get the papers from my bag. Whilst I was placing them in order, I heard the rattling of china and silverware in the next room, and as I passed through, noticed that the table had been cleared and of the lamp lit, for it was by this time deep into the dark. The lamps were also lit in the study or the library, and I found the Count lying on the sofa, reading of all things in the world the English Bradster's Guide. When I came in, he cleared the books and papers from the table, and with them I went into the plans and deeds and figures of all sorts. He was interested in everything, and he asked me a myriad of questions about the place and its surroundings. He had clearly studied beforehand, as he could get on the subject of the neighborhood, as he was evidently at the end for which he knew more than I did. When I remarked this, he answered, "Well, but my friend, is it not needful that I should? When I go there, I shall not be alone, and my friend Harker Jonathan, pardon me, I fall into my country's habit of putting your patronymic first. My friend Jonathan Harker would not be by my side to correct and aid me. He will be in Exeter, miles away, probably working at my papers at the law of my friend Peter Hawkins, so." He went throughout the business of the purchase of the estate of Purfleet, When I had told him the facts and gotten his signature on the necessary papers and had written a letter for them ready to post for Mr. Hawkins, he began to ask me how I could come across such a suitable place. I read him the notes from which I had made at the time, and which I inscribed here. At Purefleet, on a by-road, I came across such a place that would seem to be required, and where was displayed a dilapidated notice of the place was for sale. It was surrounded by a high wall of ancient structure, built on heavy stones, and had not been repaired in a large number of years. The closed gate of the old oak and iron all had eaten with rust. The estate is called Carfax, with no doubt a corruption of the old Carface. At the house is four-sided, agreed with the cardinal points of a compass. It contains all of some 20 acres, quite surrounded by the solid stone wall above it all. There are many trees of it, which makes it a place as gloomy. And there is a deep, dark-looking pond or small lake, evidently fed by some springs, as the water is clear and flows away in a fair-sized stream. The house is very large, and of all periods back, I should say, to medieval times, for one part of the stone is immensely thick, with only a few windows high up, and heavily barred on with iron. It looks like part of a keep, and is close to an old chapel or church. I could not enter it, as I did not have the key to the door leading to it from outside the house, but I had taken my Kodiak views from it to various points. The house had been added to, but in a very strangling way, and I can only guess at the amount of ground it covers, which must be very great. There is also a few houses at hand, one of them a large house, only recently added to, and formed into a private lunatic asylum. It is not, however, visible from the grounds. When I had finished, he said, I am glad it is old and big. I myself am of an old family, and to live in a new house would kill me. A house cannot be made habitable in a day, and after all, how few days go up to make up a century. I rejoice also that there is a chapel of old times. We Transylvanian nobles love to think of our bones may lie amongst the common dead. I seek not gaiety or mirth, nor the bright voluptuousness of much sunshine, or sparkling waters which pleases the young and gay. I am no longer young at heart, and my heart, though really of years mourning over the dead, is not attuned to mirth. Moreover, the walls of my castle are broken. The shadows are many, and the wind breathes cold through the broken battlements and castlements. I love the shade of the shadow, which would be alone with my thoughts when I may. Somehow his words and his look did not seem to accord, or else it was that his cast of face made his smile look malignant and saturine. Presently, with an excuse, he left me, asking me to put my papers together. He was a little time away, and I began to look for some books around me. One was an atlas, which I opened naturally to England, as if the map had been much used. Excuse me. On looking at it, I found certain places with little ring marks, and on examining them, I noticed that one was near London on the east side, manifestly where his new estate was situated. The other two were Exeter and Whitby on the Yorkshire coast. It was a better part of an hour when the Count returned. "Aha!" he said. "Still with your books, good, but you must not work always. Come, I have informed that your supper is ready." He took my arm and went into the next room, where I found an excellent supper ready for me at the table. The Count again excused himself, as he dined out on his way of being away from home, but he sat in as in on the previous night, and chatted whilst I ate. After supper I smoked, as in the evening, and the Count stayed with me, chatting and asking questions of every conceivable subject, hour after hour. I felt that it was getting very late indeed, but I did not say anything, for I felt under obligation to meet my host's wishes in every way. I was not sleepy, as the long sleep yesterday had fortified me, but I could not help but experience the chill when it came over at the coming of the dawn, which is like in its way the turn of the tide. They say the people who are nearer to death generally at the change of dawn or at the turn of the tide. Anyone who was when tired and tried at his post experienced this change in atmosphere can well believe it. all at once, we heard the crow of the cock coming up with preternatural shrillness through the clear morning air. Count Dracula jumped to his feet and said, "Why, there it is, the morning again. How remiss I am to let you stay up for so long. You must make your conversation regarding my dear new country of England less interesting, so that I may not forget how time flies, Purvis." And with a courtly bow, he left me. I went into my room and drew the curtains, but there was little to notice. The window opened to the courtyard, and all I could see was the gray sky of the gray of the quickening sky. So I pulled the curtains again, and have written of this day. 8th May. I begin to fear as I write in this book that I am getting too diffused. But now I am glad that I went into detail from the first, for there is something so strange about this place, and all of it I cannot feel but unease. I wish I was safe out of it, or that I had never come. It may be this strange night's existence to tell on me, but were that were all it were. If there was anyone to talk to, I could bear it, but there is no one. I have only the Count to speak with, and I fear I am myself the only living soul within this place. Let me be prosaic so far as the facts can be. It will help me bear up, and my imagination not run riot with me. If it does, I am lost. Let me say once again how I stand, or seem to. I only slept a few hours when I went to bed, and feeling that I could not sleep at all, got up. I hung my shaving glass in the window, and was about to begin to shave, when suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I heard the Count's voice saying to me, "Good morning." I startled, for it amazed me that I had not seen him since the reflection of the glass covered the whole room behind me. As I started, I cut myself slightly, but did not notice at the moment. Having answered the Count's salutation, I turned to the glass again to see how I had been mistaken. This time there could be no error, for the man was so close to me, and I could see him over my shoulder, but there was no reflection of him in the mirror. The whole room behind me was displayed, but there was no sign of a man in it except for myself. This was startling, and coming on top of so many strange things was beginning to increase the vague feeling of uneasiness for which I have had since when the Count is near me. But at that instant I saw the cut had begun to bleed a little, and the blood trickled over my chin. I laid the razor down, turning as if I did half round to look for some sort of sticking plaster. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with some sort of demonic fury, and suddenly he made a grab for my throat. I drew away, and his hand touched the sting of beads as it held the crucifix. It made an instant change in him, for the fury passed so quickly that I could hardly believe it was ever there. "Take care," he said. "Take care how you cut yourself. It is more dangerous to you than you think in this country." Then, seizing the shaving glass, he went on, "And this is the wretched thing that has done the mischief. It is a foul bauble of man's vanity. Away with it!" And opening the window with a wrench of his terrible hand, he flung the glass, which was shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stone of the courtyard far below. Then he withdrew without a word. It's very annoying, for I do not see how I am to shave unless in my watch case or at the bottom of a shaving pot, which is fortunately of metal. When I went into the dining room, breakfast was prepared, but I could not see the Count anywhere, so I breakfasted alone. It is strange that as of yet I have not seen the Count eat or drink. He must be a very peculiar man. After breakfast, I did a little exploring of the castle. I went out into the stairs and found a room looking towards the south. The view was magnificent, and from where I stood there was every opportunity of seeing it. The castle was on the very edge of some terrible precipice. A stone falling from the window could fall 1,000 feet without ever touching anything. As far as the eye could see is a sea of green treetops, with occasional deep rift where there was a chasm. Here and there were silver threads of the rivers winding deep in the gorges throughout the forest. But I am not a heart to describe a beauty, for what I had seen of the view I explored further. Doors, doors, doors everywhere, and all locked and bolted. In no place save for the windows in the castle walls is there an available exit. This castle is a veritable prison, and I am a prisoner. Chapter 2 finished. Seems our dear boy Jonathan has begun to notice that the Count is not what he seems. Yep. Oh, glad I sound like your Uncle Mike. He must sound interesting since I was able to imitate him so good. A little bit of the honey. Yeah, I know, but it was written in a different time. Casual racism and all that. So, I'm used to reading this stuff. I've read a lot of Oh, I did not know that. Huh. Guess I'd pull off a pretty good Polish accent, even though I wasn't trying for one. But yeah, a lot of these older books from the turn of the century have a lot of just really casual racism. If any of you have ever read any of H.P. Lovecraft's work, you know that he was not a stranger to showing off how well he thought of other races that weren't white. All right, honey is done, and chapter 3, Jonathan Harker's journal, continued. When I found that I was a prisoner, a sort of wild feeling came over me. I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out every window I could find. But after the little convictions of my helplessness overpowered me. Yes, a little bit of the bubbly. Thank you, Pugsley. When I look back at a few hours, I think I must have been mad for a time, for I behaved much as a rat does in a trap. When, however, the conviction had come to me that I was helpless, I sat down quietly as I've ever done in my life, and began to think over what could best to be done. I am thinking still, and yet has come to no definitive conclusion. Of one thing I am certain of, that it is no use in making my ideas known to the Count. He knows very well that I am a prisoner, that I am imprisoned, and he has done so himself, and has doubtless his own motives for it. He would only deceive me if I trusted him fully with the facts. So far as I can see, my only plan would be to keep my knowledge and my fears to myself, and my eyes opened. I am, I know, either being deceived like a baby by my own fears, or else I am in desperate straits. And if it is the latter to be so, I need and shall need all my brains to get out of this. I had come to this conclusion when I heard the great door below me shut and knew that the Count had returned. He did not come at once to the library, so I cautiously went on to my own room and found him making the bed. This was odd, but also confirmed what I had long thought, that there were no servants in this house. When later I saw him through the chink of the hinges of the door laying on the table on the dining room, I was assured of it, for he had done it himself, all the menial offices. Surely this is proof that there was no one else in the castle. It must be the Count himself who was the driver of the coach that brought me here. This is terrible. This was a terrible thought. For if so, what does it mean that he could control the wolves as he did, by only holding his hand to silence them? How was it that all the people of Bristolets and on the coach had some terrible fear of me? What meant was the giving of the crucifix, or the garlic, or the wild rose, or the mountain ash? Bless that good woman who hung the crucifix around my neck, for it is a comfort and a strength to give me whenever I touch it. It is an odd thing for which I have been taught to regard with disfavor, and as idolatrous should be a time of loneliness and trouble be of help. Is it there that something of the essence of the thing itself, or is it a medium, a tangible help in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? Sometime, if I may, I must examine this matter and try to make my mind up about it. In the meantime, I must find out all I can about Count Dracula, as it may help me to understand. Tonight he may talk of himself. If I turn the conversation that way, I must be careful, however, not to wake his suspicion. Midnight. I have talked with the Count. I asked him questions on Transylvania history, and he warmed up to the subject wonderfully. In his speaking of things and people, and especially the battles, he spoke as if he had been present at all of them. This he afterwards explained by saying that to a boyar the pride of his house and name is his own pride, that their glory is his glory, that their fate is his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house, he always said we, and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. I wish I could put down all exactly as he said, for me it was the most fascinating. It seemed to me to have the whole history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke and walked about the room, pulling his great white mustache and grasping anything that he could lay his hands on as though to crush it with his main strength. One thing, he said, I shall pull down as greatly as nearly as I can, for it tells the story of his race. We Shintigercurl have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who have fought as the lion fights for lordship. Here in the whirlpool of European races, the Ulric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, which their berserkers displayed with such intent on the seaboards of Europe, aye, and of Asia and of Africa too, till the peoples thought that the werewolves themselves had come. Here too, when they came, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a living flame, till the dying peoples held in their veins ran the blood of those old witches who expelled them from Scythia, had mated with the devils of the desert. Fools, fools! What devil, what witch could ever be so great as Attila, whose blood flows in these veins? He held up his arms. Is it any wonder that we were a conquering race? We were proud, and when the Magyar, the Lombards, the Avralia, the Bulgars, and the Turks poured in his thousands from our frontiers, we drove them back. Is it strange that when Arpad and his legions swept through the Hungarian fatherland, he found us here when we reached the frontier, that the Horskoflians were completed there? Or when the Hungarians' floods swept eastward, the Sclerses were claimed as kindreds of the vicious Magyars, and to us, for centuries, were trusted the guardian of the frontier of Turkeyland. Aye, and more than that, endless duty of the frontier guard, for as the Turks say, water sleeps, and the enemy is sleepless. Who is more gladly than we throughout the four nations receive the bloody sword, and for its warlike call flicker quickly than the standard of the king? When was redeemed that great shame of my nation, the shame of Kosovo, when the flags of Wallachia and the Magyar went down below the crescent? Who was it, but with my own race, would Voyevode cross the Danube and beat the Turk back on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed. Woe to all his own unworthy brother, who, when he fell, sold his people to the Turks and brought shame upon slavery upon them. Was it not this Dracula, indeed, who inspired the other races, whom in later again and again brought their forces over the great river of Turkeyland, who, when he was beaten back, came again and again, though he had come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew he could come alone, he alone could ultimately triumph. They said that he thought him only of himself. Bah! What good are peasants without a leader? Where ends the war without a brain or heart to conduct it? Again, when, after the battle of the Mokras, we threw off the Hungarian yoke, we of the Dracula blood, among their leaders, for our spirit would not brook that they were not free. Ah, young sir, the Skelety and the Dracula, as their heart's blood, their brains, and their swords can boast a record that mushrooms groweth like the Habsburgs and the Romanovs could never reach. The warlike days are over. Blood is too precious a thing these days of dishonorable peace, and the glories of the great races are a tale that is told. It was by this time close to morning that we went to bed. Memo, this diary seems like horribly at the beginning of an Arabian Nights tale, for everything has to break at the cockcrow, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father. May 12th. Let me begin with facts, bare, meager facts, verified by books and figures, and of which there can be no doubt. I must not confuse them with experiences which have rest of my own observation or memory of them. Last night when the Count came from his room, he began to ask me questions of legal matters and on the doings of certain kinds of business. I had spent the day wearily over books, and to simply keep my mind occupied, went over some of the matters that I had been examining at Lincoln's Inn. There was a certain method in the Count's inquiries, so I'll try to put them down in sequence. The knowledge may somehow or sometime be useful to me. First, he asked if a man in England might have 2 solicitors or more. I told him he could have a dozen if he wished, but it would be not wise to have more than one solicitor engaged in a transaction, as only one could act at a time, and that to change would be certainly to militate against his own interest. He seemed thoroughly interested to understand, and went about asking if there was any particular difficulty in having one man to attend, say, to banking and another to look for shipping. In case local help was needed in a place far from home, in the banking solicitor. I explained to him more fully that I might not be able to have a chance to mislead him, so he said, I shall illustrate. Your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, from under the shadow of your beautiful cathedral at Exeter, which is far from London, buys for me through your good self my place at London. Good. Now here let me say frankly, lest you think it strange that I have sought the services of one so far from London, instead of someone resident here. That my motive has no local interest might be served, save my only wish, and that one of the London residents might, perhaps, have some purpose of himself or friend to serve. I went thus afield to seek my agent. Those labors should be only of my interest. Now, suppose I, who have much affairs, wish to ship goods, say to Newcastle, or Durham, or Harwich, or Dover. Could I be more at ease by being done by co-signing to one of these parts? Sorry, a message from a friend. I answered certainly that it would be most easy, but we solicitors have a system of agency, one for another, so that the local work could be done locally on instruction from any solicitor, so that the client, simply placing himself in the hands of one man, could have his wishes carried out by him without further trouble. But, he said, could I be at liberty to direct myself? Is this not so? Of course, I replied, and such is often done by men of business, who do not like the whole of their affairs to be known by any one person. Good, he said, and then went about to ask the means of consignments and the forms to be gone through, and all sorts of difficulties that might arise, but by forethought could be guarded against. I explained all these things to him to my best of ability, and he certainly left me under the impression that he could have made a wonderful solicitor, for there was nothing he did not think of or foresee. For a man who has never been to the country, and who evidently did not know much about the ways of business, his knowledge and acumen were wonderful. So when he satisfied himself on these points that which he had spoken, and I had verified as well that I could be by the books available, he suddenly stood up and said, Have you written since your first letter to my friend Mr. Peter Hawkins, or to any other? It was with some bitterness in my heart that I answered that I had not, that yet I had not seen any opportunity to send letters to anybody. Then write now, my good friend, he said, laying a hand on my shoulder. Write to our friend and to any other, and say, if it will please you, that you shall stay with me until a month from now. Do you wish for me to stay that long? I asked, as my heart grew cold at the thought. I desire it much, nay, I will take no refusal. When your master-employer, what you will, engaged that someone should come on his behalf, it was understood that my needs would be to be consulted. I have not stinted. Is that so? What could I do but bow acceptance? It was Mr. Hawkins' interest, not mine, and I had to think of him, not myself, and besides, while Count Dracula was speaking, there was that in his eyes and in his bearing that could make me remember that I was a prisoner, and that if I wished, I could have no choice. The Count saw his victory in my bow, and his mastery in the trouble of my face, for he began at once to use them, but in his own smooth, resistless way. I pray you, my good friend, that you would not discourse the things other than business in your letters. It will doubtlessly please your friends to know that you are well, and that you look forward to getting home to them. Is this not so? As he spoke, he handed me 3 sheets of notepaper and 3 envelopes. They were all but the tiniest of the thinnest of foreign posts, and to look at them, then at him, and noticing his quiet smile with the sharp canines lying over his red underlip, I understood as well as if he had spoken them that I should be more careful at what I wrote, for he would be able to read it. I'll remember, Griff. So I determined to write only formal notes for now, but to write fully to Mr. Hawkins in secret, and also to Mina, for to her I could write shorthand, which would puzzle the Count if he ever saw it. When I had written 2 of my letters, I sat quiet, reading a book, whilst the Count wrote several notes, referring as he wrote them to some of the books on the table. Then he took them up to my 2 and placed them into his own, and put them into his writing materials. Put them by his writing materials, by which, the instant the door had closed behind them, I leaned over and looked at the letters, which were face down at the table. I felt no compunction to do so, for under the circumstances I felt that I should protect myself in every way I could. One of the letters was directed to Samuel F. Billings, number 7, The Crescent, Whitby. Another to Herr Lichter, Varna. The third was to Konith of Coates and Company, London, and the fourth was to Herin Kopsnak and Beruth, bankers, Budapest. The second and fourth were unsealed. I was just about to look at them when I saw the door handle move. I sank back in my seat, having just enough time to resume my book before the Count, holding yet another letter in his hands, entered the room. He took up the letters on the table and stamped them carefully, and then turned to me and said, "I trust you will forgive me, but I have much work to do in the private this evening. You will, I hope, find all things as you wish." At the door he turned, and at a moment's pause said to me, "Let me advise you, my dear young friend, nay, let me warn you with all seriousness, that you should leave these rooms, that should you leave these rooms, you will not by chance go to sleep in any other part of the castle. It is old and has many memories. There are bad dreams for those who sleep unwisely. Be warned. Should sleep now or ever overcome you and be like to do, then hasten to your own chamber and these rooms. Then your own rest will be safe. But if you do not, be careful in this respect then." He then finished his speech in a gruesome way, as he motioned with his hands as if he were washing them away. I quite understood my own doubt, as if whether any dream could be more terrible than the unnatural, horrible net of gloom and mystery which seemed to close in on me. Later, I endorsed the last letters written, but this time there could be no doubt in question. I shall not fear to sleep in any other place that he is not. I placed the crucifix over my bed, over the head of my bed. I began to imagine what my rest is, thus fear of dreams, and thus it will remain. When he left, I went to my room. After a little while, not hearing any sound, I came out and went to the stone stairs, where I could look towards the south. There was some sense of freedom in the vast expanse. Inaccessible it was to me, as compelled by the narrow darkness of the courtyard. Looking out at this, I felt indeed I was in prison, and I want for breath of fresh air, though it was of the night. I began to feel this nocturnal existence toll on me. It was destroying my nerve. I started at my own shadow, and was full of all sorts of horrible imaginings. God knows there is ground for my terrible fear in this accursed place. I looked over the beautiful expanse, bathed in soft yellow moonlight, until it was almost as light as day. In the soft light, the distant hills became melted, and the shadows of the valleys and the gorges in velvety blackness. The mere beauty seemed to cheer me. There was peace and comfort in every breath I drew. As I leaned out from the window, my eyes saw something moving in the stonery below me, and somewhat to my left, where I had imagined the order of the rooms, where the window to the Count's own room would have looked. The window in which I stood was a tall, deep stone muslin, and though weather-worn, was still complete. It was evidently many a day since the case had been there. I drew back behind the stonework and looked out carefully. What I saw was the Count's head coming from the window. I did not see the face, but I knew the man by the neck and the movement of the back of his arms. In any case, I could not mistake the hands which had so many opportunities of studying. I was at first interested and somewhat amused, for it was wonderful how small a matter will interest and amuse a man when he is a prisoner. But my very feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole of the man slowly emerged from the window and began to crawl down the castle wall over the dreadful abyss, facing down with his cloak spread around him like great wings. At first I could not believe my eyes. I thought it was some kind of trick of the moonlight, some weird effect of shadow, but I kept looking, and it could be no delusion. I saw the fingers and toes grasp the corners of the stone, worn clear of the mortar by stress of years, and thus using every projection and inequality of movement downwards at considerable speed, as though a lizard moving along the wall. What manner of man is this? And what manner of creature is this the semblance of a man? I feel the dread of this horrible place overpowering me. I am in fear, in awful fear that there is no escape for me. I am encompassed with terrors that I dare not think of. 15th May. Once more I had seen the Count go in his lizard fashion. He moved downwards in a sidelong ways pattern, some 100 feet down and a good deal to the left. He vanished into some hole or window. When his head disappeared, I leaned out to try and see more, but without avail. The distance was too great to allow for a proper angle of sight. I knew he had left the castle now, and thought to use the opportunity to explore more than I had dared to do so yet. I went back to the room, and taking a lamp, tried all the doors. They were all locked as expected, and the locks were comparatively new. But then I went down to the stone stairs to the hall where I had entered originally. I found I could pull back the bolts easily enough and unhook the great chains, but the door was locked, and the key were gone. That key must be in the Count's room. I must watch should the door be unblocked, so that I may get it and escape. I went on to make a thorough examination of the various stairs and passages and try to find doors that opened from them. One or two small rooms near the hallway were open, but there was nothing to see in them except old furniture, dusty with age and moth-eaten. At last, I found one door at the top of the stairway, through which seemed locked, gave way under a little pressure. I tried it harder and found that it was not really locked, but that the resistance came from the fact that the hinges had fallen somewhat, and the heavy door rested on the floor. Here was an opportunity which I might not have again, so I exerted myself, and with all making many efforts, forced it back so I could see that I could enter. I was now in a wing of the castle further to the right than the rooms that I knew, and a story lower. From the windows, I could see the suite of rooms lay along the south of the castle, the windows of the end of the room looking both west and south. On the latter side, as well as on the former, there was a great precipice. The castle was built on the corner of a great rock, so that on 3 sides it was quite impregnable. The great windows were placed in here, where sling or bow or culverin could not reach, and consequently light and comfort impossible to position had it to be guarded were secured. To the west was a great valley, and then rising far away, great jagged mountains of fastness, rising peak to peak, the sheer rock studded with mountain ash and thorn, whose rocks clung to the cracks and crevices and crannies of the stone. This was evidently the portion of the castle occupied by the ladies of the bygone era, for furthermore had more an air of comfort than any I had ever seen. The windows were curtainless, and the yellow moonlight flooded through the diamond panes enabled one to even see colors, which had softened the wealth of dust that lay over and disguised in some measure of ravages over time. My lamp seemed to give a little effect of a bright moonlight, but I was glad to have it with me, for there was some dreadful loneliness in the place that chilled my heart and made my nerves tremble. Still, it's better than living alone in the rooms where I had come to hate from the presence of the Count. Hey, Devil. Welcome. We're in the middle of chapter 3. Let's see. Here I am sitting at a little oak table where olden times possibly some fair lady sat to pen, with some thought and many blushes, her ill-sped love letter, and writing in diaries in shorthand all that happened since I closed at last. It is the 19th century up to date with vengeance, and yet, unless my senses deceive me, the old centuries had and have powers of their own which modernity cannot kill. Later, the morning of May the 16th. God preserve my sanity, for it is this that I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are a thing of the past. Whilst I live here, there is but one thing to hope, that I may not go mad, if indeed I may be mad already. If I be sane, then surely it is maddening to think that of all the foul things that lurk in this hateful place, the Count is the least dreadful thing to me, that to him alone I can look for safety, even though this is only whilst I can serve his purpose. Great God, great merciful God, let me be calm, for out of that lies madness indeed. I begin to get a new light on certain things that have puzzled me. Up to now, I never quite knew what Shakespeare meant when he made Hamlet say, "My tablets, quick, my tablets, 'tis meet that I put it down." For now, feeling as though my own brain is unhinged, or as it's shocked to have come to me to meet the end of its undoing, I turn to my diary for repose. The habit of entering accurately must help soothe me. The Count's mysterious warning frightened me at the time. It frightens me more not to think of it. For the future, he has a fearful hold upon me, I shall not doubt, for what he may say. When I had written in my diary and had fortunately replaced the book and pen in my pocket, I felt sleepy. The Count's warning came to mind, and I took pleasure in disobeying it. The sense of sleep was upon me, and with it the obstinance which sleep brings as an outsider. The soft moonlight soothed me, and the wide expanse, without giving a sense of freedom, had refreshed me. I determined not to return tonight to the gloom-haunted rooms, but to sleep here, whereof old ladies sat and sung and lived sweet lives, whilst their gentle breasts were sat for their old menfolk were away in their remorseless wars. I drew up a great couch out of its place near the corner, so that I may lay. I could look at the lovely view to the east and south, and, unthinking of and uncaring of the dust, composed myself for sleep. I suppose I must have fallen asleep. I hope so, for I fear for all that has followed was strangely real, so real that now sitting here in the broad, full sunlight of the morning, I cannot in the least believe that it was all sleep. I was not alone. The room was the same, unchanged as it was since I came in. I could see along the floor the brilliant moonlight. My own footsteps marked where I had disturbed the long accumulation of dust. In the moonlight opposite me were 3 young women, ladies in their dress and manner. I thought at the time I must be dreaming when I saw them. They threw no shadow on the floor. They came close to me and looked at me for some time and then whispered together. 2 were dark and had high aquiline noses like the Count, and great dark piercing eyes that seemed almost red when contrasted with the pale moonlight. The other was fair as can be, with a mass of golden hair and eyes like pale sapphires. I seemed to somehow know her face and to know that it is in connection with some dreamy fear, but I could not recount at the moment how or where. All 3 had brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby of their voluptuous lips. There was something about them that made me uneasy, some longing and at the same time some deadly fear. I felt my heart a wicked burning desire that if they would kiss me with those red lips. This was not a good night. This is not good to note down, lest someday I should meet Mina's eyes and cause her pain, but this is the truth. They whispered together, and then all 3 laughed. Such silvery, musical laugh, but as hard as though the sound never could have come through the softness of human lips. It was like the intolerable tingling sweetness of water glasses when played with a cunning hand. The fair girl shook her head colloquially, and the other 2 urged her on. One said, "Go on. You are first, and we shall follow. Yours is the right to begin." The other added, "He is young and strong. There are kisses for all." I lay quiet, looking out from under my eyelids in an agony of delightful anticipation. The fair girl advanced, bent over me till I could feel the movement of her breath upon me. Sweet as it was in one sense honey, sweet, and sent the same tingling through the nerves as her voice, but the bitter underlying the sweet, a bitter offensiveness, as one smells in blood. I was afraid to raise my eyelids, and looking out, I saw perfectly under the lashes. The girl went on her knees and bent over me, simply gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive, and as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shining on those scarlet lips and on the red tongues as it lapped at the white teeth. Lower and lower her head went as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed to fasten on my throat. Then she paused, and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips, and I could feel the hot breath on my neck. Then the skin of my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle approaches nearer and nearer. I could feel the soft, shivering touch of the lips of the supersensitive skin of my throat, and the hard dents of two sharp teeth just touching and pausing there. I closed my eyes in languorous ecstasy and waited with beating heart. But at that instant, another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. I was conscious of the presence of the Count, and of his being, as if lapped in a storm of fury. As my eyes opened involuntarily, I saw his strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair one, and with a giant's power drew back. The blue eyes transformed with fury, the white teeth clamped with rage, and the fair cheeks blazed red with passion. But the Count! Never could I imagine such wrath and fury, even in the demons of the pit. His eyes were positively blazing. The red in them was lurid as the flames of hell blazed behind them. His face was deathly pale, and the lines of it were hard like drawn wires. The thick eyebrows that met over the nose now seemed like a heaving bar of white-hot metal. With a fierce sweep of his hand, he hurled the woman in front of him and then motioned to the others as though he was beating them back. It was the same impetuous gesture that I had seen with the wolves. In a voice now which much lower in a whisper seemed to cut through the air, and in the ring of the room he said, "How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast your eyes upon him when I have forbidden it? Back, I tell you all. This man belongs to me. Beware how you meddle with him, or you will have to deal with me." The fair girl, with a laugh ribald colloquially, turned to answer him, "You yourself have never loved. You never love." On this the other women joined, and in such a mirthless, hard, soulless laughter rang through the room, almost as if it made me faint to hear. It seemed like the pleasure of fiends. Then the Count turned, after looking at my face attentively, and said in a soft whisper, "Yes, I too can love. You yourselves can tell it from the past. Is that not so? Well, now I promise you that when I am done with him, you shall kiss him at your will. Now go! Go! I must awaken him, for there is much work to be done." "Are we to have nothing tonight?" said one of them, with a low laugh, as she pointed to the bag in which he had thrown upon the floor, and which moved as though there was something living within it. From the answer, he nodded his head. One of the women jumped forward and opened it. If my ears had not deceived me, there was a gasp and a low wail, as if a half-smothered child. The women closed round, whilst I sat aghast with horror. And as I looked, they disappeared, and with them that dreadful bag. There was no door near them, and they could not have passed me without my noticing. They simply seemed to fade into the rays of the moonlight and pass through the window, for I could see outside the dim, shadowy figures for a moment before they entirely faded away. Then the horror overcame me, and I sank into unconsciousness. Well, if that doesn't make your hair stand on ends, I don't know what will. Shit has gotten real for our boy Jonathan. But yeah, that moment kind of scared me. At least when I first read it. When I first read that part where he finally ran into the brides of Dracula. And then you find out that they kind of ate a baby. Yeah. Kind of scared. Kind of scary. That. It's a fun read as long as you can get past the casual racism in the earlier parts, but you weren't here for that. All right. A little bit of the honey. What a little. Oh, no. Well, whatever they are. If they aren't brides, then they're just three. I did not get that, huh? Interesting. Huh. I did not think of that. Thank you for that, Griff. All right. Throat's all honeyed up. I'm hopefully gonna keep reading until the end of Jonathan Harker's journal, and then I'll call it a stream there. But we still got some ways to go. Let's see. Yeah, that's true. I didn't notice that at first. All right. Chapter 4. Jonathan Harker's journal continued. I awoke in my own bed. If I had not dreamt it, the Count must have carried me here. I tried to satisfy myself on the subject, but I could not arrive to any questionable result. To be sure, there were certain small evidences, such as the clothes around that were folded and laid in a manner to which it was not my habit. My watch was still unwound, and I was rigorously accustomed to winding it, the last thing to do before going to bed, and many such other details. But these things were no proof, for they may have been evidences of my mind not being as usual, and, for some cause or another, I may have been much upset. I must watch for proof. For one thing, I am glad. If it was the way the Count carried me here and undressed me, he must have been hurried in his task, for my pockets are intact. I'm sure that this diary would have been a mystery to him, for he would not have broke it. He would have taken it or destroyed it. As I looked around the room, although it must have been to me so full of fear, it was now something of a sanctuary, for nothing can be more dreadful than those awful women who are waiting to suck my blood. 18th May. I looked back down at the room again in daylight, for I must know the truth. When I got to the door at the top of the stairs, I found it closed. It had been so forcibly driven against the jamb that part of the woodwork was splintered. I could see that the bolt had been locked hard, had not been shot, but the door was fastened from the inside. I fear it was no dream, and I must act to surmise this. 19th May. I am sure in the tolls. Last night the Count asked me in the suavest tones to write 3 letters, one saying that my work here was nearly done, and that I should start for home within a few days, another that I was starting on the next morning from the time of the letter, and the third that I had left the castle and arrived in Bristol. I would fain to have rebelled, but felt in the present state of things that it would be madness to quarrel openly with the Count while I am so absolutely in his power. And to refuse to do so would excite his suspicion and arouse his anger. He knows that I know too much, that I must not live lest I be dangerous to him. My only chance is to prolong my opportunities. Something may occur to me which will give me a chance to escape. I saw in his eyes something that was gathering wrath that was manifested when he hurled the fair woman away from him. He explained to me that posts were few and uncertain, and that my writing would ensure ease of mind to my friends. And he assured me that with so much imperativeness that he would countermand the later letters, would he be held over at Bristol until due time and the chance to admit of my prolong of my stay, that to oppose him would have been to cause new suspicion. I therefore pretended to fall into his views and asked him which dates I should put on the letters. He calculated a minute and then said, "The first should be June 12th, the second June 19th, and the third June 29th. I now know the lifespan of my life. God help me. May 28th. There is a chance to escape, or at any rate being able to send word home. A band of Strigani have come to the castle and are camped in the courtyard. They are gypsies. I have notes of them in my book. They are peculiar in this part of the world, though allied to the ordinary gypsies from all over the world. There are thousands of them in Hungary and Transylvania, who are almost all outside of the law. They attach themselves to a rule of some great noble or boyar and call themselves by his name. They are fearless and without religion save superstition, and they talk only of their own varieties in the Romanian tongue. I shall write some letters home and have to give them to them to be posted. I have already spoken to them through my window to begin acquaintanceship. They took their hats off and made obeisances and many signs, which, however, I could not understand any more than I could speak their own tongue. I have written the letters. Mina's is in shorthand, and I simply asked Mr. Hawkins to communicate with her. To her I have explained my situation, but without the horrors in which I may have surmised. It would shock and frighten her to death were I to expose my heart to her. Should the letters not carry, then the Count shall not yet know my secret or the extent of my knowledge. I have given the letters. I threw them through the bars of the window with a gold piece, and made what signs I could to have them posted. The man who took them pressed them to his heart and bowed, and then put them in his cap. I could do no more. I stole back to the study and began to read. As the Count has not come in, I have written here. The Count has come. He sat down beside me and said in his smoothest voice as he opened the two letters, "The Stergani have given me these letters, of which I know not whence they came from. I shall, of course, take care. See?" He must have looked at it. "One is from you, and to my friend Peter Hawkins. The other—" He caught sight of the strange symbols as he opened the envelope, and the dark look came into his face, and his eyes blazed wickedly. "The other is a vile thing, an outrage upon friendship and hospitality. It is not signed. Well, so it cannot matter to us." And he calmly held the letter and envelope to the flame of a lamp until they were consumed. Then he went on, "The letter to Mr. Hawkins I shall, of course, send on, since it is yours. Your letters are sacred to me. Your pardon, my friend, that I unknowingly did not break the seal. Will you not cover it again?" He held out the letter to me, and with a courteous bow handed a clean envelope. I could only redirect it and hand it to him in silence. When he went out of the room, I could hear the key turn softly. A minute later, I went over to the door and tried it, and the door was locked. When an hour or two passed, the Count came quietly into the room. His coming awakened me, for I had gone to sleep on the sofa. He was very courteous and very cheery in his manner, and seeing that I had been sleeping, he said, "Ah, so, my friend, you are tired? Get to bed. There is surely rest. I may not have the pleasure of talking with you tonight, since there are many labors to me, but you will sleep, I pray." I passed to my room and went to bed, and strange to say, slept without dreaming, despite its own claims. 31st May. This morning when I woke, I thought I'd provide myself with some papers and envelopes for my bag and keep them in my pocket so that I might write in case I should get the opportunity. But again, a surprise. Again, a shock. Every scrap of paper was gone. I read all my notes, my memoranda relating to the railway travels and the travel, my letter of credit, in fact, anything that might be useful to me once I were outside the castle. I sat and pondered for a while, and then thought occurred to me. And then I made search for my portmanteau and into the wardrobe where I placed my clothes. The suit in which I traveled with was gone, and along with my overcoat and rug. I could not find no trace of them anywhere. This looked like a new scheme of villainy. 17th June. This morning, as I sat on the edge of my bed, cudgeling my brains, I heard without a crackling of whips and a protruding scrape of hoofs feet on the rocky path beyond the courtyard. With joy, I hurried to the window and saw drive into the yard 2 great Lidniers wagons, each drawn by 8 sturdy horses, and at the head of each a Slovak with a wide white hat, great nail-studded belts, dirty sheepskin, and high boots. They also had their long staves in hand. I ran to the door, intending to descend and perhaps join them in the main hall, as though it may be the way to open to them. Again, my door was fastened from the outside. Then I ran to the window and cried to them. They looked at me stupidly and pointed, but just then the hetman of the Stragani came out, and seeing them pointing at my window, said something at which they laughed. Henceforth, no effort of mine, no pious cry or anguished entreaty would make them even look at me. They all resolutely turned away. Their wagons contained great square boxes with handles of thick rope. These were evidently empty boxes, by the ease of which to make the Slovaks handle them, and by some residents they were roughly moved. When they were all unloaded and packed in a great heap in the one corner of the courtyard, the Slovaks were given some money by the Stragani, and spit on it for luck, lazily went to each horse's head. Shortly thereafter I heard the cracking of their whips die away in the distance. 24th June. Last night the Count left me early and locked himself in his own room. As soon as I dared, I ran up the winding stair and looked out the window, which opened south. I thought I could watch the Count, for there was something going on. The Stragani had quartered something in the castle, and are doing some kind of work. I know not, I know it now, for then I hear far away muffled sounds of mattock and spade, and whatever it is, it must be some end of ruthless villainy. I had been at the window for some time, less than a half an hour, when I saw something coming out of the Count's window. I drew back and carefully watched, and saw the man emerge whole. This was a new shock for me, for he had on the suit of clothes which I had worn whilst traveling here, and slung over his shoulder was the terrible bag by which the scene the women take away. There could be no doubt in his quest, and in my garb too. Then this is his new evil scheme, that he would allow others to see me, as to think that he may both leave evidence behind that I have been seen in towns or villages, posting in my own letters, and then any wickedness that he may do shall by the local people attribute it to me. It makes me rage to think this could go on, and whilst I am shut up here, a venerable prisoner, but without the protection of the law which gives even a criminal's right in consultation. I thought I would watch the Count's return, and for a long time I sat doggedly at the window. Then I began to notice that there were some quaint specks floating in the rays of the moonlight, the tiniest grains of dust, and they whirled around in great clutters in a neblonious sort of way. I watched them with a sense of soothing, and a strange calm stole over me. I leaned back into the embrasure in more than a comfortable position, just so I could enjoy fully the aerial gamboling. Something made me start up, a low, pious howling of dogs somewhere far below the valley, which had remained hidden in my sight. Louder it seemed to ring in my ears, and the floating motes of dust that takes new shape at the sounds that they dance in the moonlight. I felt myself struggling to stay awake, to call some of my instincts. Nay, my very soul was struggling, and my half-remembered sensibilities were striving to answer the call. I was becoming hypnotized. Quicker and quicker danced the dust. The moonbeams seemed to quiver as they went by me into the mass of the gloom beyond. More and more they gathered, till they seemed to take dim, fantastical shapes. Then I started, bolted awake and in full possession of my senses, and ran screaming from the place. The phantom shapes which had become gradually materialized in the moonbeams were those of those 3 ghastly women which I was doomed. I fled and felt somewhat safer in my own room, where there was no moonlight, and where the lamp was burning brightly. A couple of hours passed when I heard something stirring in the Count's room, something like a sharp wail that was quickly suppressed. And then there was silence, deep, awful silence, which chilled me. With a beating heart I tried for the door, but I was locked in my prison and could do nothing. I sat down and simply cried. As I sat, I heard the sound in the courtyard without, the agonizing cry of a woman. I rushed to the window, and throwing it open, peered behind the bars. There indeed was a woman, with disheveled hair, holding her hands over her heart, as one was distressed with running. She was leaning against the corner of the gateway. When she saw my face at the window, she threw herself forward and shouted in a voice laced with venom and malice, "Monster! Give me back my child!" She threw herself on her knees, and raising up her hands, cried the same words in tones which wrung my heart. Then she tore her head and beat her breast, and abandoned herself on all the violences of extravagant emotion. Finally, she threw herself forward, and though I could not see her, I could hear the beating of her naked hands against the door. Somewhere overhead, probably on the tower, I heard the voice of the Count calling in his harsh, metallic whisper. He called, seemed to be answered from far and wide by the howling of wolves. Before many minutes had passed, a pack of them poured, like a pent-up dam when liberated, through the wide entrance of the courtyard. There was no cry from the woman, and the howls of the wolves were but short. Before long, they steamed away, licking their lips. I could not pity her, for I knew what had become of her child, and she was better off dead. What shall I do? What can I do? How can I escape from this dreadful thing of night, gloom, and fear? June 25th. No man knows till he has suffered from the night how sweet and dear his heart and eyes the morning can be. When the sun grew so high in the morning that it stuck to the top of the great archway opposite my room, the high spot in which it touched seemed to me as if the dove from the ark had landed there. My fear fell from me as if by a vaporous garment which had dissipated the warmth. I must take action of some sort while the courage of the day is upon me. Last night, one of my post-dated letters went to post, the first of the fatal series that which is to blot out the very traces of my existence from the earth. Let me not think on it. Action! It was always at night time that I had been molested or threatened, and in some way of fear or danger. I have not yet seen the Count in daylight. How can it be that he sleeps when others are awake, and he be awake while they sleep? If I could only get into his room! But there's no possible way. The door is always locked. No way for me. Yes, there is a way if one dares to take it. Where his body had gone, why may not another body go? I have seen him myself crawl out from his window. Why should I not imitate him and go in by his window? The chances are desperate, but my need is more desperate still. I shall risk it. For the worst, it can only be death, and a man's death is not a calf's, and the dreaded hereafter may still be open up to me. God help me in my task. Goodbye, Mina, if I fail. Goodbye, my faithful friend and second father. Goodbye, all, and last of all, Mina. Same day, later. I have made the effort, and God help me have come back safely to this room. I must put down every detail in order, whilst I have my courage was fresh straight from the window of the south side, and at once go out to the side. The stones were big enough and rough cut, and the mortar by which the process of time had washed away between them. I took off my boots and ventured out in a desperate way. I looked down once, just to make sure there was a sudden glimpse of that awful depth that would not overcome me. But after that, I kept my eyes away. I know pretty well the direction and distance to the Count's window, and made it there as well as I could, having regarded the opportunities available. I did not feel dizzy. I suppose I'm too excited, and the time seemed ridiculously short that I found myself standing on the windowsill and trying to raise up the sash. I was filled with agitation, however, but when I bent down and slid my feet first through the window, and then looked around for the Count, but to my surprise and gladness made a discovery. The room was empty. It was barely furnished with odd things which seemed to have never been used. The furniture was the same style as the other rooms in the south rooms, and was covered in dust. I looked for the key, but it was not in the lock, and I could not find it anywhere. The only thing I found was a great heap of gold in one corner, gold of all kinds, Roman and British, Australian and Hungarian and Greek and Turkish money, covered in a film of dust as though it had lain on the ground for long. None of it, I noticed, was less than 300 years old. There were also chains and ornaments, some jeweled, but all of them old and stained. In one corner of the room was a heavy door. I tried for it since I could not find the key to the room or the key to the outer door, which is the main object of my search. I made further examinations of it, and all my efforts would be in vain. It was open and led through a stone passage to a circular stairway which steeped down. I descended, mildly careful of where I went, for the stairs were dark, being only lit by the loopholes in the heavy masonry. At the bottom was a dark tunnel-like passage, which threw a deathly, sickeningly sweet odor, the odor of old earth newly turned. As I went through the passage, the smell grew closer and heavier. As I pulled open a heavy door which stood ajar and found myself in an old ruined chapel which had evidently been used as a graveyard. The roof was broken, and in two places were steps leading to vaults, but the ground had been recently dug over, and the earth placed in great wooden boxes. Manifestly, those had been brought by the Slovaks. There was nobody around, and I made a search at every inch of the ground as to know not to lose a chance. I went down into the vaults, which were with the dim light struggled. All to do so was although to do so was the dread of my soul. In 2 of these I went, but saw nothing except fragments of old coffins and piles of dust. However, in the 3rd I made a discovery. In one of the great boxes, by which 50 were all entombed, on a pile of newly dug earth lay the Count himself. He was either dead or asleep, I could not say which, for his eyes were open and stony, and without the glassiness of death, and the cheeks were the warmth of life through their pallor. The lips were as red as ever, but there was no sign of movement, no pulse, no breath, no beating of the heart. I bent over and tried to find any signs of life, but in vain. He could not have lain there for long, for the earthy smell would have passed away in a few hours. By the side of the box was its cover, placed with holes here and there. Here I thought he might have keys on him, but when I went to search him, I saw the dead eyes, and in them, dead though they were, such a look of hate, though unconscious of me or the presence, that I fled from the place and left the Count's room by the window and crawled back up the castle wall. Regaining my room, I threw myself panting on the bed and tried to think. 29th June. Today is the date of my last letter, and the Count has taken steps to prove that it was genuine, for again I saw him leave the castle by the window, and in my clothes. As he went down the wall, lizard fashion, I wished I had some gun or some lethal weapon so that I might destroy him, but I fear no weapon wrought along the man's hands would have any effect on him. I dare not wait to see him return, for I feared for these weird sisters. I came back into the library and read till I fell asleep. I was awakened by the Count, who looked at me as grimly as a man could look, as he said, "Tomorrow, my friend, we must part. You return to your beautiful England, I to some work which have some ends that we may never meet. Your letter home has been dispatched. Tomorrow I shall not be here, but all shall be ready for your journey. In the morning the Stragani, who have had some labors of their own here, and will also come the Slovaks. When they are gone, my carriage shall come for you, and shall bear you to the Borgo Pass to meet the diligences of Bukovina to Bristolets. But I am in hopes that I shall see more of you at Castle Dracula." I suspected him, and determined to test his sincerity. Sincerity! It seemed like a profane to use the word to write in connection with such a monster. So I asked him point blank, Why may I not go tonight?" "Because, dear sir, my coachman and horses are away on a mission. But I would walk with pleasure. I want to get away at once." His smile, soft, smooth, diabolical smile that I knew with some trick behind the smoothness. He said, "And your baggage?" "I do not care about it. I can send for it another time." The Count stood up and said in a sweet courtesy which made my eyes rub, that seemed so real, "You English have a saying which is close to my heart, for it is spirit which rules our boyars. Welcome the coming, speed the parting of the guests. Come with me, my dear young friend. Not an hour shall you wait in my house against your will, though I am sad at your going, and though you so desire it. Come." With a stately gravity, he, with the lamp, preceded me down the stairs and along the hallway. Suddenly he stopped. "Hark!" Close at hand came the howling of many wolves, as if almost the sound sprang at the rising of his hand, just as the music of a great orchestra seemed to leap up at the baton of a conductor. At a pause of moment, he proceeded, in his stately way, to the door, drew back the ponderous bolt, unlocked the heavy chains, and began to draw it open. To my intense astonishment, I saw it was unlocked. Suspiciously, I looked around, but I could see no key of any kind. As the door began to open, the howling of the wolves without grew louder and angrier, their red jaws with champing teeth and their blunt clawed feet as they leapt, came through the open door. I knew that to struggle at that moment against the Count was useless. With such allies as these at his command, I could do nothing. But still the door continued to slowly open, and only the Count's body stood in the gap. Suddenly it struck me that this might be the moment and means of my doom. I was to be given to the wolves, and by my own instigation. There was a diabolical wickedness in the idea great enough for the Count, and at the last chance I cried out, "Shut the door! I shall wait till morning." I covered my face with my hands to hide the tears of bitter disappointment. With a single sweep of his powerful arm, the Count threw the door shut, and the great bolts clanged and echoed in the halls as they slid back into place. In silence, we returned to the library, and after a minute or two, I went to my own room. The last I saw of Count Dracula was kissing his hands to me, with a red light triumphant in his eyes and a smile that Judas in hell might be proud of. When I was in my room, about to lie down, I thought I heard a whispering at my door. I went to it softly and listened. Unless I heard my ears deceive me, I heard the voice of the Count. "Back! Back to your own place. Your time has not yet come. Wait, have patience. Tonight is mine. Tomorrow night is yours." There was a low, sweet ripple of laughter, and in a rage I threw open the door and saw without the three terrible women licking their lips. As I appeared, they all joined in a horrible laugh and ran away. I came back to my own room and threw myself on my knees. It is then so near the end. Tomorrow, Lord, help me and those who I am dear to. June 30th. These may be the last words I ever write in this diary. I slept until just before dawn, and when I threw myself awake on my knees, for I am determined that if death shall come, he would find me ready. At last I felt the subtle change in the air and knew that morning had come. Then came to the welcome cock crow, and I felt I was safe. With a glad heart I opened the door and ran down the hall. I had seen the door was unlocked, and now escape was before me. With hands trembling with eagerness, I unhooked the chains and threw back the massive bolts. But the door would not move. Despair seized me. I pulled and pulled at the door, and it shook, till, massive as it was, it rattled at its casement. I could see the bolt short. It had been locked after the Count had left. Then a wild desire took me to obtain the key at any risk, and I determined then and there to scale the wall again and gain the Count's room. He might kill me, but death now seems happier choice of evils. Without a pause, I rushed up to the east window and scrambled down the wall before the Count's room. It was empty, but that was to be expected. I could not see a key anywhere, but the heap of gold remained. I went through the door to the corner room and down the winding stair and along the dark passage to the old chapel. I knew now well enough to find that monster I sought. The great box was in the same place, close against the wall, but the lid was laid on it, not fastened down, but with the nails ready to put in their place to be hammered home. I knew I must reach the body for the key, so I raised the lid and laid it back against the wall. Then I saw something that filled my very soul with horror. There lay the Count, but looking as if his youth had been half restored, for the white hair and mustache had changed to a dark iron gray. His cheeks were fuller, and the white skin seemed ruby red underneath. The mouth was redder than ever, for on the lips were gouts of fresh blood, which trickled from the corners of his mouth and ran down over his chin and neck. Even the deep burning eyes seemed amongst swollen flesh, for the lids and pouches underneath were bloated. It seemed as if the whole awful creature was simply gorged with blood. He lay like a filthy leech, exalted from his repression. I shuddered as I bent over to touch him, and every sense in me revolted at the contact, but I had to search or I was lost. The coming night might see my own body a banquet in a similar war to those three. I felt all over his body, but no sign could I find the key. Then I stopped and looked at the Count. There was a mocking smile on his bloated face, which seemed to drive me mad. This was the being I helped to transfer to London, where perhaps for centuries to come he might, in its teeming millions, satiate his lust for blood and create a new and ever-widening circle of semi-demons to batten on the helpless. The thought drove me mad. A terrible desire came upon me to rid the world of such a monster. There was no lethal weapon at hand, but I seized a shovel which the workmen had been used to fill the cases, and lifting it high, struck with the edge downward at that hateful face. But as I did so, the head turned, and the eyes fell upon me, with their blazing of basilisk horror. The sight seemed to paralyze me, and the shovel turned in my hand and glanced from my face, merely making a deep gash on the forehead above. The shovel fell from my hand across the box. As I pulled it away, the flange of the blade caught the edge of the lid, which fell over and hid the horrid sight from my sight. The last glimpse I had of that bloated face, blood-stained and fixed with a grin of malice, which would have held its own in Nearsmith hell. I thought and thought what should be my next move, but my brain seemed to be on fire, and I waited, for a desperate feeling was growing over me. As I waited, I heard in the distance a gypsy song sang by merry voices coming closer. Through their song, the rolling of heavy wheels and the cracking of whips. The Strigani and the Slovaks came, whom the Dracula had spoken of were coming. With a last look around, and at the box which contained the vile body, I ran from the place and gained the Count's room, determined to rush out at the moment the door was opened, should it be opened. With strained ears I listened and heard down the grinding key in the lock of the great lock, and the falling back of the heavy door. There must have been some other means of entry, or someone had the key to those locked doors. Then came the sound of many feet trampling and dying away from some passage, which set up an echo. I turned and ran down again towards the vault, where I might find the new entrance at the moment where it seemed to come a violent puff of wind, and the door and the winding stairways blew to a shock that set the dust from the linens flying. As I ran to push it open, I found it was hopelessly fast. I was again a prisoner, and the net of doom was closing around me more closely. As I write these, there is a passage below the sound of the tramping feet, and the clash of weights set down heavily, doubtlessly in the boxes of their freight of earth. There was a sound of hammering. It was the box being nailed down. Now I can hear the heavy feet trampling again along the hall, and with minute the idle feet coming behind them. The door is shut. The chains rattled. There was a grinding of the key in the lock. I could hear the key withdrawn. Another door opens and shuts. I hear the creaking of lock and bolt. Hark! In the courtyard down the rocky way rolled the heavy wheels, the crack of whips, and the chorus of Strigani as they passed in the distance. I am alone in this castle with those horrible women. Mina is a woman, and there is naught in common. They are devils of the pit. I shall not remain alone with them I shall not remain alone with them. I shall try to scale the castle wall farther than I have ever yet attempted. I shall take some gold with me, lest I want it later. I may find a way from this dreadful place. Then away for home, away to the quickest, nearest train, away from those cursed spots, from this cursed land where the devil and his children still walk the earth. At least God have mercy. At least God's mercy is better than those monsters, and the precipice is steep and high. At its foot, a man may sleep as a man. Goodbye, all. Mina. And so ends Jonathan Harker's journal. Whew. It was a lot harder than I remembered. Damn. But yeah, we're gonna end it there. So, what did you guys think of my my reading of Bram Stoker's Dracula? I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed it myself. I hope I was animated enough to keep you guys your attentions and keeping you entertained. At least having this on in the background to give something to listen to while you're doing other stuff. But we're gonna end it here, and we're going to pick up. We're gonna pick up on Saturday night. Hopefully around the same time, 7 to whatever time this is. Not sure how many chapters that will be, but I'll try to get through as fast as I can. And we'll start, and of course, the next part of the book will be, of course, focusing on Jonathan's beloved wife, well, future wife, Miss Mina Harker. Yes, she's a toughie. She's a goodie but a toughie. So, with that out of the way, we're gonna just shut down the stream for a while. I'm glad you guys could join me. Hopefully, I'll see the rest of you on Saturday night, same time, 7 o'clock. So until then, Shintigercurl, that dude sans the straw hat, saying good day, good night, and sleep well, my children.